what I discovered is that after 100 days and nights a year, living in the woods without any accoutrement other than a pair of binocs, a map, and a shortwave radio that got me in contact with a ranger station twice a day, it really put my head into the wild. I mean, little by little, the wildlife even seemed to sort of accept me. And one day, I had my horn with me up there, my trumpet, and I was playing just some jazz riffs, and a turkey started to gobble, and a little while later, a coyote got into it. And so we were playing sort of a jazz sonata for wildlife out there in the boondocks, and boy, it was fun. I just realized that every time I sit outside, I'm sitting out there with my cousins, and it's such a good feeling.
You're listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. I'm your host, Jack Humphrey. Water, water, water. There's no lack of water in the desert, unless you try to establish a city where no city should be. That was Edward Abbey from his love letter to the desert Southwest called Desert Solitaire. A perfect backdrop for today's talk with his longtime campmate and best friend, Jack Loeffler. Turning 90 next month, Jack is a legendary conservationist. If you've ever read The Monkey Wrench Gang, Jack lived much of the real-life history behind those pages. Alongside Abby and Dave Foreman, he spent decades backpacking the backcountry, running wild rivers, and co-founding the Black Mesa Defense Fund in 1970. Today, we dive into that rich history, including a stunning deathbed confession from former Secretary of Interior Stuart Udall. But we also tackle the urgent present, from the looming Deadpool crisis on the Colorado River to Jack's upcoming Santa Fe exhibition, Querencia, Finding One's Place in Nature. Find your perch and fluff up your nest, because you're about to tap directly into the living memory of the modern conservation movement in the U.S. Southwest. Jack, it's great to talk with you again on the Rewilding Earth podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Jack. It's great to hear you again.
First of all, congratulations. Your 90th birthday is coming up. I wanted to say happy birthday, and wow, what an achievement.
Well, thank you very much. July 11th, 1936 was a big day for me. 7/11, a lucky day.
Yeah. Earlier, you were talking about stuff you were doing with Dave Foreman or Ed Abbey or both when I was 2 years old, and just talking about it super casually like it was no big deal.
We were just a bunch of guys doing what we thought was the best thing we could in behalf of habitat and everything else. And boy, when I think back on those days, it just seemed to me that's just who we were, just a bunch of guys. Actually, it wasn't like we ever did a lot of group things other than run rivers or go backpacking or something. But we were people who really, well, we all liked each other for one thing. We got to hang out when we could. We lived in different parts of the North American Southwest. I came to the Southwest in 1957 as an Army bandsman in the United States Army, 433rd Army Band, down outside of Barstow, California.
What was your instrument?
Trumpet and flugelhorn.
Nice.
And I actually, by the way, I played jazz in a town very close to you, Jack. I played jazz all through 1960 in Indianapolis, where some of the greatest jazz musicians were. I wasn't one of them, but boy, there were some really good ones.
I want to get into what you've been up to lately, and what was the impetus behind these thoughts behind human consciousness, and why attach rewilding to it?
Back in 1965, I took a fire lookout job on top Caracas Mesa in northwestern New Mexico in the Hickory Ranger District of the Carson National Forest. And by golly, there I was, no tower, no tent, no nothing, just on top of this rock. I camped off the top of the rock in the back of my pickup truck the first year. But what I discovered is that after 100 days and nights a year, living in the woods without any accoutrement other than a pair of binocs, a map, and a shortwave radio that got me in contact with a ranger station twice a day, it really put my head into the wild. I mean, little by little, the wildlife even seemed to sort of accept me. And for example, one day, 2 gold eagles hovered right over me for about an hour, which was a mind blower, I'll tell you. And another time, I had my horn with me up there, my trumpet. And one time I was playing just some jazz riffs, and a turkey started to gobble. And a little while later, a coyote got into it. And so we were playing sort of a jazz sonata for wildlife out there in the boondocks. And boy, it was fun. That was a really good one. But just living out there that much in the wild really did place my mind in a different place. I always carried a bunch of books with me when I went up there. And at that time, as I recall, I was deeply involved in reading Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung and a couple of different versions of the Tao Te Ching. And I would do a fair amount of meditating, always have, because I felt that was really good for me.
Yeah.
And so little by little, I began to realize that using different kinds of techniques of just concentrating on being out there with all of the other living matter, all of the other fellow organisms, all of which, all of us are descended from, a single cell that popped into being about 4 billion years ago, the last universal common ancestor, Luca for short. I just realized that every time I sit outside, I'm sitting out there with my cousins. And it's such a good feeling. For example, the other day I looked it up. Apparently, we share about 60% of the same genetic code as ravens, for example.
Mm.
And that's kind of an interesting thought. So, because ravens are incredible, of which there are a lot around here.
Yeah.
And so when I sit outside, and the abundance of trees, the abundance of bushes and insect life and bird life, and even mule deer trailing through my yard all the time, every day, it's really pretty easy to get my mind into it. And what I realized, one of the things that really triggered this essay was there were so many urban deer whose consciousness has become urbanized, that it was really important to really try to really rewild my own consciousness as best I could, even though I can't get out into the backcountry anymore, run wild rivers anymore, or any of that stuff. At least all of those memories are with me. And if one just sort of lets one's body go and mind take off into the wild, you can actually keep rewilding your own consciousness indefinitely. And boy, I just feel that's one of the most important things. Another factor there, I looked this up on the internet when it was working. Apparently, about 83% of those of us in America now live in urban environments, leaving only 17% in the wild or in rural environments. And that doesn't bode well for thinking in terms of people really adjusting their minds to getting deeply back into habitat and, really working on saving wildlife. Like turtles working with jaguars, I also, for many years, have known Diana Hadley. I've known her since 1967 when I bought a refrigerator from her. But boy, she's really been in the jaguar recovery for a long time. And just so many people taking a given species. My friend Melissa Savage, for example, she's a biogeographer, now emeritus at UCLA, but for many years, she's been restoring river otters, not just here in the United States, but elsewhere in the world. And I remember one day in 1973, in August 1973, she and I and some others running the San Juan River, and she glanced over at what she thought was an otter slide, and I saw the light bulb go on. Way back when, that's 53 years ago.
Yeah.
And since that time, she's really done a remarkable amount of otter recovery around the world. So, boy, more power to those folks, I'll tell you.
As you were talking about your memories, I accidentally tested it before we started recording, and throughout what I thought was just an arbitrary date, I believe I said December 3rd, 1973. I don't expect anybody to know what they did last week, let alone December 3rd, 1973. But what did you tell me?
Well, first of all, that was my mother's birthday. She was born on December 3rd, 1908. She lived until she was in her 90s, 93, and passed in 2002. So she lived a good long life. But at any rate, the likelihood for that day would have been that the Abbeys and the Loefflers were getting ready to go camping somewhere in the North American Southwest, because we did that a lot every winter. Well, Ed and I went camping 3 or 4 times a year for a couple of weeks at a crack, because we figured it took us that long to really get deeply back into that mind, that rewilding mind, so to speak.
What did it feel like when you guys talked about how long do you think it's going to take us to declare that we feel fully rewilded?
Well, basically, it was when our intuitions were working harder than our intellects. You know, we really slipped into that mode, which you can't really describe verbally. At least I can't. But boy, it's a mode that you know well when you get into it. Ed spent a lot of time as a fire lookout. I spent 3 years at it, or 3 seasons at it. But 100 days and nights a year is enough to get you into it. And we would go into places, all sorts of places. I think the furthest south in the United States we got was Big Bend. We ran the lower canyons of the Rio Grande. That was an amazing adventure back when you could. I'm not sure there's any water there anymore, but probably the furthest north we camped was the Piceance Basin up in northwestern Colorado. Ed had gotten a gig writing a story for National Geographic magazine about the fact there was an intent to detonate subterranean atomic bombs that would bring up oil. And we hoped that they could possibly extrapolate that the oil would be too radioactive for human consumption. I think they didn't do it, but at any rate, we hung up there for about, a couple of weeks. And then I guess the furthest west was, I think they were the Muchacho Cargo Mountains of the Mojave Desert. And a memory from that was that we were out hiking around, and all of a sudden Ed said, "There's water." And we walked around for an hour, and by golly, he found a spring. He had an amazing sense of knowing where to find water. And it was just great. We had a lot of fun. We sit around campfires on, as I said, almost every holiday season during the December and January. We and our families would go camping, and just to stay away from the holiday stuff. And during those months, some years, a few times we got down into Mexico, down into Sonora on the Sea of Cortez, and hang out around down there, which was always fun. But we always had some interesting adventures with the local constabulary, to say the least.
Yeah, there's a lot of uses for the word wild in rewilding as well. Just a lot of different ways that can be achieved.
I can't, at this age, the idea of putting on a backpack in hiking boots and hiking 10, 15 miles a day, 20 miles a day is not something that I can do anymore. And so that's one reason why I'm practicing a lot, trying to just keep my mind as wild as possible by just sitting outside and letting the wildlife, the fauna and flora, really get into my head. But one of the things about Ed's writing that comes to mind is that he was not being particularly successful. And I think it was Bill Eastlake who became Ed's literary agent. And Knox Berger told Ed to write what he loves, write about what he loves. And that's what spawned Desert Solitaire, which to me is his best book.
Agree.
By the way, one time it was his last Thanksgiving, 1988, and he and his family were up visiting us, as we did every Thanksgiving pretty much. And he and I were taking our nightly walk, which we did every time we got together. We walked 2 or 3 times a day as far as we could. And then he asked me to grade his books. And boy, that's a terrible question. And I did. I gave it as honest an answer as I could. And at the end of it, he said, well, that's the same way I've graded him. And that sort of made me feel a little bit better anyway.
Yeah, what a relief that must have been.
Yeah. And so all of the books from Desert Solitaire on, he was focused. And his big focus was, we've got to keep the wild. We've got to keep extractors out of it as best we can. And boy, did that invigorate Earth First. I remember when that kicked in. But it invigorated before Earth First. I knew of a couple of other guys who would go out there and do things that probably were regarded as illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, it was an interesting time in American history. And boy, I just wish the spirit of that time could come back big time, because there was an energy to it that, frankly, I don't feel anymore. And the upshot is that there are an awful lot of river rafters living right here in town, and their rafts are mounted. There's one right down the street from me. They just sit out on the street, and then guys hook up their trucks to them and pull them out to the river. And that kind of thing abounds. And Durango is filled with backpackers and wilderness people. It's a terrific place to be from that point of view. And another thing that's very important to me where I live is that there's a place, Fort Lewis College, and there are over 140 different indigenous tribes presently enrolled up at Fort Lewis College. So there's a sense of indigenous mindedness, which is a big thought for me, that is here in Durango. So I'm one of the lucky people. I get to, if I can't go out backpacking in the Red Rock country, at least I'm close to it, and I can sure sense it. And just yesterday, a good buddy of mine who was out in Antelope Canyon sent me a photograph of Navajo Mountain from a distance, Navajo Mountain being the remotest part of the Navajo reservation, where I was fortunate to live for half a year in a fork stick hogan back in 1964. And boy, that was a joy, I'll tell you. And that's where I realized that traditional indigenous cultures are enormously shaped. Their collective system of attitudes is enormously shaped by the habitat that shapes them.
Mm.
And that really was the beginning of a whole different part of my life, where I traveled for years, over 50 years, with microphone and recorder, which you're sure aware of, and traveling to different indigenous cultures from as far north as Nez Perce all the way down to Alacandones down in Chiapas, and really getting to talk to tribal elders who expressed their deepest feelings with regard to their habitats. They all regarded homeland as sacred. And so one of the things that comes to mind big time, and this comes right out of Hispano culture in northern New Mexico, which is now indigenous to that habitat after at least 20 generations. And also how they have been involved in what is known as the mestizaje, the mixture of both cultural perspective and bloodline with Native Americans. And there's a word that my friend Sylvia Rodriguez has brought up. She's written a great amount on the importance of acequias, which are irrigation ditches. And she talks about how that can lead to the resacralization of the land. Mm. And that to me is a very important concept to put out there these days, because we have so secularized it in modern monoculture.
Wilderness is self-willed land. A wild animal is a self-willed animal. They are earthlings that are as yet not thralls to man. Those words from Dave Foreman define why we do what we do. The Rewilding Earth podcast is a long-running project of the Rewilding Institute. Because of listeners, donations, and people and organizations sharing this podcast with others, you've helped us spread the blueprint for a wilder, more self-willed world. But we can't let up. Most of the world still needs to absorb what it means to restore nature for its own sake. Please consider making a donation today to support the show. Your gift helps us reach the next generation of rewilders who will rebalance the natural world. Go to rewilding.org/donate to help us spread the word. And thanks for standing with the wild. I have a picture that you sent on this page, rewilding.org/Querencia, and it says Hopi elders and Jack Loeffler testifying in 1972. What was that about?
Well, in 1970, early 1970, an old pal of mine, a guy named Bill Brown, who at that point was the historian for the southwestern region of the National Park Service, and he had heard scuttlebutt about a coal strip mine that was going to be enormous, that was going to take place out on Black Mesa, which was a place that I knew of by virtue of having been out there a lot by then. You know, I lived up at Navajo Mountain. Navajo Mountain is regarded as the head of the female mountain, the body of which is Black Mesa. That's in Navajo. And I had a really good friend, a Hopi friend who was very old, but who was a friend. And we had really gotten to be good friends for at least 6 years. And I heard more scuttlebutt about water being pumped out of the aquifer on Black Mesa, the slurry coal, and that there would be 2 power plants that the coal from Black Mesa would serve. And so as soon as I had as much information as I could get, I went out to Oak Villa on Third Mesa and talked to my old friend, David Manonia, and told him what I'd learned. And boy, he was really taken aback. And he asked me if I could camp there for the night and the next day tell the Hopi elders what I had learned. And subsequently, the next day, we all met on Second Mesa, 63 Hopi elders, 5 of whom appear in that photograph with me, by the way. And I told them what I had learned, and boy, they were really upset. Basically, that the Hopi Tribal Council, which was not really recognized by the traditionalists, had signed a lease with the Peabody Coal Company of East St. Louis with the blessings of the United States government, the Department of the Interior and everything, to mine coal on Black Mesa, to fire up the Navajo generating station is yet to be constructed. They're taking a train load of coal a day for that, just to fire up that one power plant. And the other power plant was over in Laughlin, Nevada, known as the Mojave Power Plant. And coal would be slurried using Pleistocene water pumped out of the aquifer beneath Black Mesa at the rate of 2,000 gallons a day to slurry coal to that Mojave plant over in Laughlin, 273 miles away.
Wow.
Well, the Hopis totally bummed. and so was I. And they asked me to help them try to stop it, to get it out to the American public, and to just generally try to do everything we could to stop it. And so I went back to Santa Fe. We'd already started an environmental organization called the Central Clearinghouse to try to find out about hotspots, environmental hotspots around the Southwest. We sort of started that in 1969, and it was through that I'd learned about the Black Mesa. And so with my friends Jimmy Hopper, Bill Brown, Terry Moore, we started the Black Mesa Defense Fund. And boy, we went at it every way we could think of. We did a lot of speaking engagements. Thomas Banyakya, a Hopi elder who spoke pretty good English, and I traveled around to different universities around the United States, trying to hire up young people and getting them involved in it, and did a lot of, appearances on TV, places like DC, Washington, DC. I was interviewed by a panel of journalists there, and that happened in different places around the United States. I started writing articles, especially for Not Man Apart, for Clear Creek magazine in San Francisco. We did everything we could think of, including things that I won't talk about. And Dave Foreman came to join us. That's when Dave and I met. Ned Abbey and I we did field work, research for his book, The Monkey Wrench Gang, that came out in 75 after we had long closed our doors. We had to close them in 72. We ran out of energy, we ran out of money, and we had done everything we could do. And by that time, it was revealed just how tricky this whole thing was. Basically, the whole thing came to be because of the Central Arizona Project. People from Arizona to get water into the central valleys of Arizona, based on the sense of deep jealousy because California was getting so much water from the Colorado River, 4.4 million acre feet a year, and actually 5.6 because they were taking more than their share from the Colorado Compact of 1922. It's a very complex issue, but nonetheless, the Central Arizona Project would pump something like 1.6 million acre feet out of Havasu Lake into the central valleys of Arizona, ostensibly for agriculture, but realistically for development, what Ed Abbey called the metastasis of Phoenix and Tucson. And we finally got it to where we got it before the Congress of the United States. I went back and testified there to no avail whatsoever. And the photograph took place in Page, Arizona, where the 5 Hopis and I were testifying to try to thwart strip mining of coal and construction of coal-fired power plants and pumping of water to slurry coal in the North American Southwest. And immediately after the Hopis and I testified, Ed Abbey came up and said, "Come on, let's get out of here." And we went out and camped in Pariah Canyon, which was appropriate because by that time we were pariahs.
Good, with pride. Yes. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking of an entire life spent in the shadow of, haunted by, the plight of, and fighting always for the greater Colorado watershed. What's that like to be? It's a different way. Everybody's tied to their watershed, whether they know it or not. But you guys were hyper aware of exactly. And people that live in the U.S. Southwest are more aware of water and water issues than people anywhere else in the country, pretty much. What's it like to be tied to, when you look at it from that lens, and you look back on everything that you've done, all the sorrow, all of the loss, all of the victories when you could get them, and just having so much of your life's work tied to that watershed in the way that it has been?
Well, I'll tell you, it's been a biggie for me. I have spent a lot of time on different rivers in this watershed. Starting in 1971, it's the first time I ran the San Juan. And I became really interested in watershed thinking at that point. running wild rivers surely starts to make you think about this is the water. And when you run the San Juan, you're running through a really arid habitat. And running the Green River is the same way, and other rivers that I've run out here. And at one point in 2001, I attended a meeting of the Humanities Councils of the 7 states privy to the waters from the Colorado River watershed, which includes Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, California, and Nevada. And at the end of the thing, they asked me if I would write a proposal, a grant proposal, which I did, to both the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Ford Foundation, and got funding to produce a 6-part radio series on, it's called Moving Waters, the Colorado River in the West, which occurred in conjunction with an exhibition, a traveling exhibition by the same name. And so I traveled pretty much to the headwaters of the Green, the Colorado, and the San Juan, and I got all the way down to the Delta, where there was no water whatsoever, although there was an irrigation canal runoff. I think it was the Walton Mohawk Canal running off about 20 miles east of the Delta itself. And I did go over there for a couple of days and rented a canoe and paddled around. And boy, even though the agricultural water is somewhat saline, it's not as saline, it's far fresher than the water in the Sea of Cortez. And boy, the wildlife abounded. It was just incredible. And I interviewed 75 people up and down all of those rivers throughout the watershed, including Native American people and everybody I could find who had something to say about the river, including Floyd Dominy, who brought us the Glen Canyon Dam when he was the commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, and Stuart Udall, who had been Secretary of the Interior during the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, and who had been very privy to and forwarded very much the concept of the Central Arizona Project. I met Stuart when he was still Secretary of the Interior, and we were friends, real friends. Actually, Stuart was one of my best friends. Incidentally, on his deathbed, he'd gotten his caregiver to call me up and ask me to come over. We went over and I sat there for a minute, and for half an hour with him. And he looked me right in the eye and he said, "Jack, you were right. The Central Arizona Project was a dreadful mistake." Emphasis on dreadful, which blew me away. And Stuart was my sound editor for that radio series. I played every single program back to him, and if it needed to be tweaked, he tweaked. And it was really an honor to me, because he knew more about the Colorado River by virtue of having been the Secretary of the Interior. He was also the major domo of the lower basin of the Colorado River, which extends from Lee's Ferry just below the Glen Canyon Dam all the way down to the Mexican border. And so he knew that river inside and out. He and his family ran it. I think Dave Brower was with him for part of that time. I interviewed Dave, too, who was a giant in my mind. I really liked him. We became good friends. And we actually backpacked together down Coyote Gulch at one point. And the upshot is that I was with people who were privy to the entirety of the entire history of the Colorado River, beginning in 1922, when the original compact was written. And thus in 2022, I wrote an essay, which is in a book I did called Pagan Polemic, Reflections on Nature, Consciousness, and Anarchism. Came out in 2023, but I wrote a pretty hefty essay in that book on the 20th anniversary of the 1922 Colorado River Compact. So I got to know the river. At one point, my daughter and I got a grant to do both a book. The book is called Thinking Like a Watershed, which is very much a concept I've been forwarding for a long time. And the radio series was titled Watersheds as Commons. The word commons really came to me when I read Garrett Hardin's essay, Tragedy of the Commons, in 1970. He published that in 1968. And I began to see the watershed as commons. Well, now I see just about everything as commons. I think of human consciousness as a commons, and we have to be really careful what we put into it. And we got to be pretty darn careful what we can strain out of it. Anyway, I'm coming from the whole watershed, because the watershed of the Colorado River I've gotten to know pretty darn well on a lot of different perspectives.
As you're talking, I'm thinking I'm talking to a living thread all the way back to the earliest talks about what to do with water, how to support these big cities in desert areas. There's not very many people that can do that are still here. So thank you once again for doing all of this and keeping all of this going. And it's really important that people remember their history. I remember that was hammered home all the time working with Dave Foreman, and he would talk about the importance of understanding those who came before us, those who laid the groundwork for the kind of conservation that we were doing at the time and what we continue to do to this day. He said the minute that we start to forget those things is when we become more ineffective in DC, we become more ineffective locally, we become more detached, and boy, was he right.
Well, one of the things I'd like to bring up is, and this is something I'm really grateful for, in the last Rewilding newsletter, it was brought out how everybody remembered to continue following the precepts as forwarded by Aldo Leopold. Boy, and he was an amazing guy.
Yeah.
And I did a 1-hour radio special called Aldo Leopold in the Southwest, and I interviewed Dave about that, Dave Foreman, because he was hugely influenced by Aldo Leopold, as was I. And I was honored to get to interview Leopold's two daughters, Nina Leopold Bradley and Estella Leopold Jr., the way I think of it. These two wonderful ladies, actually Estella and I became friends, and then she passed some years ago at the age of 96. But boy, that family was amazing. Luna Leopold I met in Berkeley considerably earlier, and I interviewed him because he had been the original hydrographer for the Colorado River and the Rio Grande, these two sister rivers that really provide water to the Southwest. One thing I want to quickly mention before it goes out of my head, when I produced that radio series on the Colorado back in 2001, the water was running at a rate of between 15 million and 16 million acre feet per year. And it served a human population of 25 million. When I wrote the essay in 2022, it was running closer to 12 million acre feet and serving a human population of 40 million. And the Colorado River Compact, which I've read vigorously and had explained to me, does not provide one drop of water for the habitat through which that whole river flows throughout the entire watershed, which to me is an enormous tragedy of presumed human needs.
Did you ever think you would see it happen in the way that it is happening, that Glen Canyon would start to reappear? Now, you were probably there when they cracked the dam, Dave and Ed, and we all had these fantasies about how Glen Canyon would be freed. But was this ever on your mind? Like it would just evaporate? We would just suck all the water out?
Well, it seems apparent to me that might be an inevitability. My friend Don Cook was just in Antelope Canyon, and he sent me a photograph of the lake, and it's just awful right now. My biggest worry is within 100 feet, I think, of dead pool. And if it continues at this rate, it will no longer be able to turn the turbines that provide an awful lot of electricity for that. And the only hope now, which is lingering on everybody's tongue when we have these conversations, is that there's great hope for the El Nino that's ostensibly developing and may provide us with a real monsoon season. But that does not account for the fact that there was so little snow in the mountains this year, and it's all melted off way early. And subsequently, the watershed is really in dire straits. And I just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, here in Durango, we're on water shortage alert right now, and there's a limited amount of water use in town, and which I'm happy to hear.
I wanted to see the lake drained. I wanted to see Glen Canyon like everybody else. I was taught that place was really the most miraculous canyon. It blew away in every way the Grand Canyon for beauty and hanging gardens and just amazing stories from people who were able to experience it. But I never wanted it this way. Like seems, we can't really celebrate this too much because of the desperation that's about to come. Like, what are we going to do? It's just really kind of a crazy time to just sit and witness this. And you can start to see more and more of the canyon, but you can't really just like pump your fist in the air because it's not the way any of us envisioned it, except Abby. Of course, he wanted to build an adobe bomb, but yeah, it's just an odd time.
Well, it is. But one of the things that I think about a lot, when I was born, the human population of the planet was 2.2 billion or thereabouts. When Ed was born, it was just under 2 billion. I think when Gary Snyder was born, it just hit 2 billion. And now it's 8.3 billion. And just looking at the population increase, human population increase on the planet, in conjunction with our whole sense of having to fulfill presumed human needs, at least people are beginning to snap, women especially, beginning to snap to the fact that having a lot of babies is a lot of hard work. And right now, trying to feed everybody is getting to be pretty much of a lost cause in a lot of places. The dire straits that so many fellow humans in this planet are presently experiencing by virtue of acute stress, which is resulting in the wars and all of that kind of thing, and ridiculous politics. We really have to rearrange our whole system of cultural attitudes. To me, that's the biggest problem, Jack, is that our system of cultural attitudes has just gone into this nosedive of ethical perspective on so many different fronts. And subsequently, that's a tough nut to crack.
The younger generations are really being very vocal in certain circles about consumerism, capitalism. It gives me a little bit of hope that they're getting tired of this. They want to be the last generations where this is the campfire that we all sit around, especially in America, because they see right through it. I do take hope in those sentiments being expressed in more and more places of people just being tired of the way practically everything works in this country. I mean, they have a critique for practically everything, and that's cool because I think practically everything in this country is a little bit or a lot broken.
Oh boy, I concur. And indeed, my hope is with the young. Matter of fact, I've dedicated a book or so to the children who will save us from ourselves. If we can rearrange our cultural coordinates, our system of ethical attitudes, or the ethics that should be incorporated into our attitudes, which really relies big time on looking at the planet itself, looking at the planet as this little tiny dot in space that has life and cognition happening on it. If we can finally see that for what it is.
So, as everybody knows when you're listening to this, we always have something called extra credit at the bottom of every single episode. And as you can probably imagine, this one's going to be robust. It's going to be chunky. It's going to have thunk factor. Just because Jack's so busy right now, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. Not just memories of wonderful days gone by, but also contemporary stuff. He has an exhibit going on in Santa Fe, starting July 3rd to August 19th. It's called Querencia, Finding One's Place in Nature. You will be able to find that in the extra credit for this episode, and many other things that we talked about here. So when you go to rewilding.org/pod, look up episode 177, you will find this there, and you can listen to it again, or you can go straight down to the extra credit and get the links, all the information on the exhibit. And we've put up a virtual piece of the exhibit at rewilding.org/Carencia, and you'll be able to find the link there and the spelling there. So we will take care of you. And Jack, I just have to say, I wish we had a show just to talk to you every week for as long as you want to.
Aw,
Just to, yeah, because I mean, my goodness, to think about the scope and scale and all of the things that you've done in your wonderful life and that you continue to do and help people understand, and the connection, the thread throughout such a great long history, and the people that you've hung out with and the stories you have to tell. I just would love to have a podcast dedicated to you.
well, yeah, I want to thank you, Jack, for not only this podcast opportunity, but also for putting up that part of querencia. By the way, the word querencia is an old Spanish word with no English language equivalent, but it means finding that spot on the planet where you feel most at home, most surrounded by beauty. And as my good buddy Enrique Lamadrid, who told me about Querencia in the first place, said, the place you want to die in. You know, it's that special place. So anyway, thank you so much, Jack, for everything. I really appreciate it. Godspeed, buddy. Keep going.
On behalf of everyone at the Rewilding Institute, thank you for listening, sharing, and supporting the Rewilding Earth podcast. Over the last 9 years, this show has grown into a significant global community because of people like you. If you'd like to keep that momentum going and rewild the world with us, please head over to rewilding.org/donate. Your support ensures we keep telling the stories that the wild needs us to hear. Thanks for listening.